start. I just want to welcome everyone to the first weekly StartSmart Webinar series by Flat6Labs, where every week we will interview a prominent member of the ecosystem on topics of interest to the Flat6Labs community. And today we have Chris Schroeder and Hany Al Sonbaty. Chris is a global investor, internet media entrepreneur, and CEO with over 20 years of experience. Hany is a co-founder of Sawari and Flat6Labs, VC pioneer in the MENA region, headed TMT investments at EFG for over 12 years. Prior to Sawari, he managed a portfolio over $500 million, of which $200 million was in the TMT sector, including some of the region's first VC funds. And today, Chris and Hany will talk you through how your startups can navigate during a pandemic. But without any further ado, I'll leave the floor for Hany to take off the conversation.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Chris, for joining. Obviously, I believe you're in DC right now.
I am. Yeah.
So the first thing is, how are you, and how's everyone you love and everyone around you?
You're nice to ask, and the same back to you and to all the entrepreneurs that we're talking to. I hope everyone is doing well. I hope their families are all okay. We're pretty lucky. Everybody is actually home now, and I've got, my son actually works with Flat6Labs in Sawari, and he's virtually commuting. I've got a daughter in college who's now virtually graduating. I have a son in high school who's virtually graduating. So everybody's here and everybody's functioning, and we spend a lot of time just being philosophical and seeing how we can help entrepreneurs and other people who really are in need right now.
We're great here. A relative sense, everyone here is safe and sound, and hopefully we're going to keep it that way. We've been working from home for the best part of 3 weeks now, prior to the government recommending it. So we're good. So I mean, good. The first thing I'd like to ask you, just briefly, take me to the emotional and thought process that you've had from the first time you heard about the emergence of the virus in Wuhan till today. And because I'd like to understand how you thought about it and what you saw coming, what you prepared for before today.
I think there is a spiritual, almost emotional answer to that. And then there's an analytic answer. On the spiritual and emotional side, I think that despite, having traveled all over the world, and I was in China just a few months ago, there was a feeling at first that this was something that was over there. It was tragic and very serious, but, hard to fathom that it would affect the day-to-day of America. And so if we were talking maybe January, even maybe early February, I think I had an element of that denial and kind of a Kubler-Ross, denial stage of things. That was a part of it. I think the other thing is I'm a very data-oriented guy. I've got lots of friends who are medical professionals and researchers, out in Stanford, a lot of kind of biotech friends in Silicon Valley. And so quite early on, intellectually, I was looking at data that really said, uh-oh. And, you still try to kind of negotiate, again, in the Kubler-Ross sense, what you could do with stuff. And so I can remember having debates with family and entrepreneurs of, well, maybe we can travel up until this day, or yes, maybe you can take that trip. Whereas it's clear that we should have locked down much sooner and certainly gotten testing done much sooner. And now I think I'm in a phase that's a resembling acceptance, which is this is what it is, and we're all in it together, and let's find ways that we can help each other get through it.
Okay, so speaking of acceptance, right? And I presume there's a lot of entrepreneurs looking at us. And the first thing we do, right, as Flat6Labs and Sawari Ventures is we actually took the decision to let everybody work from home on the beginning of a week. And then it took us like a week to figure out how to make the business run efficiently and business integrity and make sure everyone is safe. I presume a lot of people in the world, especially in Egypt, are past that. But would you like to tell them anything specific? Because there are a lot of businesses that are doing trade-offs. Do you have any insight into that about how to balance business continuity with other safety matters?
I think just a macro thought and then a more specific to your question thought overall. And I think the macro thought is, if any crisis has taught us anything, and Hany, you and I have been through
Yeah.
several in our lives, and I do believe this one is different. I believe this one is without precedent. But one thing that is at least shared is that great entrepreneurs and great companies do great things even in significant challenge and face. In fact, the definition of a great entrepreneur is to sort of overcome a challenge and think through it. And so I think first and foremost that this will pass. There will be something that is going to be, as we'll talk later, I think, different, but also some things which will be quite the same. And if you have a great problem that's making people's or businesses' lives better, easier, faster, cheaper, more efficient, more beautiful, that opportunity doesn't go away. So that is to kind of take heart and to sort of tie yourself to that mast, that if you've got a great idea and a great team and a great product fit, you just have to kind of muscle through to get to it. To your specific question, there's the obvious practical reality, which is if you got cash right now, you're always navigating. Do you want to still go for growth, assuming that you can in a period of uncertainty, or do you harbor this cash for a time that will come when that growth will continue? And I tend to be more toward the latter. I've been advising a lot of entrepreneurs that you really have got to hunker in and tighten your belts very smartly right now, that this thing will come back, but it's not going to come back overnight. It's not like you have to be a market timer. But you can do two things. One is you can harbor your cash. And then secondly, you can start having discussions with yourselves of what might be different as this comes back, and what kinds of learning do you have to be able to hit it very, very hard as we go through a gradual, and I think it's going to be a gradual process of something that will be opportunistic for people who are building great things. And so that's the kind of balance that I ask people to think about, and certainly I think about in my worlds.
Well, you definitely favor harboring the scarce resource of cash and a lot of deep thinking about how you're going to come out of this. How are you going to come out of your corner fighting when this is all over? Now, there is one dislocation or one reset, whatever you want to call it, depending on the fancy word, that is very similar to this in one aspect, in the sense of funding, which was after the dot-com crash, where funding for startups literally dried up overnight. You and I went through it. I was here in this part of the world, and it literally dried up. There was nothing. So how did you navigate that the first time? In like when Yahoo went from 150 and everything dried up and people were saying Amazon's going to go bankrupt, and that period, because in terms of potential funding crunch, that's probably the closest we might get.
You know, it's funny. I was thinking about this the other day. I have had interesting bad luck or good luck, depending how you want to do it. I literally was taking a company public at a time when we had a major market crash some years ago. And in my own company that I was running, healthcentral.com, which was a platform for millions of people to share their healthcare experiences and kind of help each other overall, we literally were like closing our round just as Lehman blew up in the last crisis. And your investors, get very conservative and they get very worried. And the answer in an unsatisfactory way is that luck is playing a role. There are many great companies right now that are either going to have trouble raising money, or they're going to meet bad venture capitalists who are going to take advantage of this and try to beat them in submission on terms. But there are going to be others that have enough and can shepherd enough through, or get enough friends and family and angels to help bridge them through this period. Because a lot of great investors, both funds and individuals, know that we will come out of this, and great entrepreneurs are great entrepreneurs. The sad fact is that there are going to be some companies that will not be able to get cash in that time period, and that is a sad ramification for this. But right now, what I'm seeing of most of my venture capital friends is a little bit of a wait and see. They haven't closed for business. They're just trying to process the data and trying to get a sense of the trajectory here. But the good news is a lot of them, and this is a global phenomenon, have raised a lot of money in the last 3 months, and they will want to deploy that money for great entrepreneurs with great ideas, and sort of help them, the best of them anyway. We'll want to help these entrepreneurs navigate the next 18 months or whatever it will be to get back to some kind of a new world where people can think about growth.
Because actually, that's a fantastic point. There is a lot of the venture capitalists in this part of the world too, and I say this to everyone listening, a lot of them do have a lot of dry powder. They do have the money, and they're processing to see who the winners and losers are coming out of this. So the money is available. The only risk I see in this part of the world are people honoring their commitments to invest. Are you seeing that in the value? People think that people are invoking force majeure clauses to get out LP, stuff like that?
It's such an interesting, powerful question, and in a way, it's a little bit early to know. What I've observed is a bit of a pig in the python, meaning if you're a great company and a great entrepreneur and you had a term sheet signed recently, I'm seeing those deals getting closed at their terms. In fact, I'm signing 2 term sheets with one fund that I'm affiliated with this week. And we didn't recut the deal because we believe in the long term of this. I've seen other venture capitalists who have come in and say, oh, now it's 30% less. And I will tell you something, entrepreneurs are going to remember this time. They are going to remember who was great and who were really, frankly, abusive. And it's the smart ones, which I think so far the majority are saying, look, we may have to hold back a little bit, but we can help you get there. Or we're all in and we're going to help you get there. It's the newer deals where I think we're going to see a little bit more people that will be more wait and see. We'll move quickly. We'll move less quickly. So we'll have to see how that plays out. I'm not quite sure right now, but that's what I'm seeing at the moment.
Well, we're getting similar experiences from this part of the world. I mean, you have direct exposure to the 5 continents. You're a very personable person. You like to dig, to extract stories from the entrepreneurs you talk to. And I presume, knowing you've been talking to everyone, seeing how they were doing, first of all. Are there any general themes that cut across the globe from entrepreneurs that you've seen, things that can help other people stay safe or stay sane, or best practices, or keeping company culture, anything that you've soaked up from all of these conversations?
I think that there are amazing stories, and you're right. I mean, I'm on Zoom from, somewhere between 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning every day until early afternoon with entrepreneurs in the Middle East, but certainly Asia and Latin America and other places in the world. And it is a very shared experience, asking a lot of the same questions you're talking about. The one thing that does come up also quite regularly, which I think is very important for entrepreneurs to be thinking about, which is something that you mentioned almost in passing, which is the culture. At the end of the day, there's so much that can be done virtually, and we'll talk about virtualness in a moment. But it is not quite the same as just being physically with that team, rallying each other on in the ways, and to make sure that the cultural paradigms aren't assumed. I think sometimes people have been thinking that which they've established just instantly translates into virtualness. And I'm hearing more and more people saying it's not the same. I had a fascinating conversation with a great woman entrepreneur in China. And right, China is an interesting case because we have no idea if the data is right or what's really going on there. But it does seem like they're a lens of what's coming. And she said that their culture suffered tremendously 2 months in virtualness because they're just dynamics of things that slipped. There were sub conversations that we're having outside of Zoom or whatever platform that they were using, and that you need to get it back aligned. And you need to talk really openly with your team, not only checking in and how are you doing, but you feel like we're adhering, to our values, and are we doing for each other, which we vowed we would do in order to create the great growth that we're trying to create. And so that would be the one that really jumps out that I've heard quite consistently. And I think we can't underestimate that as entrepreneurs.
I mean, I didn't actually use it in passing because it's a thing that strikes, because whether fortunately or not, there is the book, The Hard Things About Hard Things, and the follow-up, what your culture is what you do, and they're both by the same person, and Ben Horowitz, and it's like what we have to live. Everybody, I think, has to read them because everybody's going to have to. I mean, I'm rereading them both, and because there will be hard decisions ahead for everyone. And culture is at the key of that. If you're going to come back to something, you might as well come back to something that is worth coming back to from a corporate culture perspective. Now, obvious question people are asking across the globe. You've talked to companies. Some companies have had their income collapse. Some companies have had their income go up. I want your view on winners and losers, short term and in the new normal.
So, let me talk a little bit thematically and maybe give a couple of specific examples, because I love the way that you use the new normal, because I think people underestimate that whatever comes out of this, there are going to be things foundationally new, I believe. If we don't have complete, Armageddon, there will be things that are foundationally new. And human nature is also human nature. There are desires and wants and hopes and aspirations, which will be very much there as we come out of this as well. And I think we're balancing it. There's a wonderful saying that's been attributed to a lot of different people, but the saying is very good, which is that revolutions are most often overestimated in the short run and underestimated in the long run. And I think that's what we're going to see. We're going to see things that are forever different that we will observe gradually, and then we will see things that really are quite familiar to us that we need to engage. Because a great entrepreneur is fundamentally thinking, am I making somebody's life better, easier, faster, cheaper, more efficient, more beautiful, more engaged than it was before? And that as kind of a North Star in almost anything that you do is powerful. There's sort of three strings more specifically that I pull on thematically, which I think are not only about new opportunities, but are about how we think about our existing opportunities, right? I think that we have now hit a massive tipping point in the acceptance of virtualness. You and I and all the people here have been using Zoom and everything for some time. And now, in America, it's 200 million people or whatever it is. It's my mother. It's a whole new shift where people are saying, this really works. And actually, this is pretty good. And it does make my life more efficient. And I can do business in a different way. I think as a corollary to that, we're going to see a total massive adoption of mobile transactions and mobile payments. And as you know, in your region, and this is happening elsewhere in the world, literally cash is being banned in mobile transactions, which is effectively forcing people to say, I've done COD all my life, and in the Middle East, COD has been huge in many transactions, but now I've got to, if I can't figure out a credit card, I got to work with a bank or do mobile payments on the app. And I'm just going to be comfortable with it in a way that I'm almost being forced to. I'm kind of leapfrog into it. And by the way, this isn't just on the consumer side. I invest in a lot of B2B credit companies and some in the trucking business, and their clients, small businesses, are saying, hey, you were right. Maybe this mobile payment stuff is actually pretty good. So we see stuff like that. Telemedicine, I can't tell you the number of people I've talked to who are skeptical of it, and they feel empowered talking to a doctor in their own home, in the safety of their own home, in a very, very powerful way. Education is, as you and I were talking about, I have 2 kids at home right now, and we have an entire country and world right now that is studying from home. And so people will rethink this sort of leapfrog to new stuff. The second area I think a lot about is that so many people are being left out by access to technology. And, a lot of governments and a lot of people, pay some serious or often lip service attention to what we call the digital divide, which is who has access to technology and who doesn't. What we've just witnessed now is effectively telling humanity who is not well connected, like, you can't go on roads. I mean, imagine if you're a business person or a small business person or a one-person merchant, and all of a sudden you cannot literally use a road. That's the moral equivalent, which is happening when people can't participate in the virtualness there. So I think that there's going to be opportunity for entrepreneurs to think about that problem. And I think that there are going to be also top-down institutions that are going to bring that to bear. And the third one, which I think is a more kind of a personal one, and I'm not sure how it translates to business per se, but in all the excitement we had about AI coming into this, and that all of our companies are machine learning companies, every pitch I get from the Middle East and everywhere in the world at some point has a slide saying that there are an AI company, which is in part true and in part great. But I think that we've all been put back on our heels by which this has happened. And we're all asking ourselves in some form, what does it mean to be human? How do we value our time? How do we value our engagement with others? How much time do we want to be in the hands of an algorithm? And how much time do we want to be reaching out to each other and helping each other or thinking about the world in a different way? And I think that's going to be very interesting to watch if that stays over time, or whether that is something that just happened in a moment. But I don't have a crystal ball, we'll have to see.
All right, so we accept virtual, we bridge the digital divide, we become more human. Those are the 3 themes, the positive themes. What's worrying you from the coming at the end?
obviously, like all great investors, you always worry about what you don't know. And there's so much that we don't know. And the one thing I encourage to entrepreneurs and my friends alike is we can get so spun up by Twitter or whatever social media that we're using about the last data point that comes out. And I think most of the data right now is highly skeptical everywhere. Not this is people like to point at certain countries or whatever that may or may not be fair. But I think everywhere right now, it's unclear the numerator of how many people are sick where and how many people we're losing where and for what reason. And the denominator, because there have been so few people relatively tested. And so I think it's a moment to be reflective and not to jump and get spun up about the next best thing, because that compounds this concern of we don't know what this is going to mean or how we're going to react to it. And that worries me, a great deal. And the timing of this is certainly concerning. I mean, I think people who have thought that things would be quote unquote back to normal this summer, they aren't understanding kind of the basics of virality in this very dangerous sense. And that this is going to take a lot of time to figure out, raising a lot of big questions. So obviously that I think can be very concerning. At a more tactical level, all these wonderful businesses that you and I have supported and we know so well, which have by definition human connectivity at their essence, like getting into Uber or getting onto an airplane or going to a restaurant. Like these are huge multiplier ramifications of society. And so at one level you say, unbelievable that Zoom is doing so well, unbelievable that Amazon is doing well, unbelievable that many companies are able to benefit from this. But this human connectiveness, which I believe does come back without question, is going to bury a lot of enterprises that have very good ideas, but are going to have trouble getting through the next 18 months. And it certainly could be that amount of time.
Okay. Now, from your perspective, what is the single most interesting conversation you've had with someone outside of the US? Something that changed your mind about how you look at this crisis and what's going to happen afterwards? Because I like to.
There are many at many different levels overall. And I would say that they share a theme. I mean, the one I shared before, where the woman was telling me about the challenges of her culture being locked down for 2 months, at a kind of day-to-day operating business, really pushed me. I've had conversations with, friends in Asia, and there's been this kind of conventional wisdom that Asia has this thing kind of held and kind of fixed. But obviously, Singapore is doubling down right now quite smartly. I mean, they've been unbelievable. And so they're willing to do the smart, tough stuff. But, we all need to walk humbly, in our ways. It's very, very important that we walk humbly. And so those conversations have been very helpful overall.
There is a regulatory shift across the globe. To give you an example, FDA restrictions are being watered down. And on the other end, there are tighter controls on movement, on following people all across the globe. What's your view? How are we going to come out of this with less regulations, more in some, less in some? And how do you think, and the other big question that comes on top of this, how will this affect almost 30 years of global integration, where now people are looking at levels of self-sufficiency as a matter of national emergencies? I mean,
I'll answer your second question first. I'm an unapologetic globalist.
yes.
I think the power of what has been engaged by what is shared, and which has just been happening organically because of the connectivity that technology allows, is one of the most powerful phenomenon that has happened since the Second World War. And I believe that's stronger today. It's ironic to me that in this crisis, so many people will use this. And by the way, it's politically expedient to use it as an opportunity to be isolationist, right? And so it's because it's a very easy sell to say, if we weren't engaged in the world, this would not have affected us. But one, I don't believe it's a realistic reflection of the world as it is today. And secondly, I think that what COVID has shown us is that global connectivity has never been more important. If anyone once said there are not shared interests globally. This has proved that wrong, because if in fact there was more transparency, if we were more open with each other about what we learned, if we were willing to admit mistakes that we have all made, because everyone will make mistakes at this, so that we can learn from them. If we were earlier able to kind of rally resources around the world so that it could be helpful in a very powerful way, if we could share good lessons learned, we would have realized that this is something that we're all in it together. And I think we're seeing very, very powerful elements of that, both bottom up and top down. And so I believe very strongly this is a moment which underscores the importance of global connectedness, but it also begs, I think, some very fair questions. Were individual countries or lands, supply chains more narrow than they should have been? How should we think about that? Yeah. And those are really serious conversations, and they should be had, I think, in a very thoughtful way. Whether or not we're entering of more or less regulation, I think that anyone doesn't really know. I can make an argument about how this kind of crisis allows totalitarian and authoritarianness to rise even more so. And there are scenarios where this global connective tissue that I've described can have a very new moment and a very new opportunity. It's hard to know. But this is also true. Things have been pumped out into the world that are very hard to pull back once they're there. Yeah. So if you and I had this conversation, say in January, and I would have described to you what the balance sheet of most countries look like now, which were already over levered to begin with, right? There's already too much debt to them to begin with. There's no wild fantasy movie that would allow for the kind of numbers that are thrown around. We have, for better or for not, we'll have to see, effectively allowed UBI to happen, right? Right now, there's a basic income that is an assumption that it has to be part of the solution. Look, I personally think that is a necessity. I think there are too many people who are suffering and cannot get by paycheck to paycheck, and we have to do what we have to do to get through this. But what that will mean and what we'll be willing to think about in a different construct once it is there is going to be one of the more fascinating things that we'll all be experiencing, not in the next year, but in the decades to come.
Okay, I think that's fair. Now, as an investor and someone looking at companies to invest in, would you shy away from things that require cross-border logistical chains, or even if everything is done, we're fully vaccinated, their mobility is back to what it was, or you worry about those long-term effects that you can't maintain those logistical channels, or focus on single country investments before, or things that are more locally sourced? How do you view that as putting your money where your mouth is on this particular issue?
Well, if it helps, I haven't sold my stock in Apple as an example of this, because I just think it's an incredibly impactful company and has many resources in it at that level. I think when it comes to the earlier stage companies, I think the question that I asked, of which what you're pulling on is an example of it, is how are they thinking themselves about the world being different? What might happen to them that makes their basic premise of 2 months ago different going forward? And one of the strings I would pull on is, how reliant are you on supply, and where will you need that supply to be able to get it? How reliant are you to scale by going to multiple markets versus maybe being somewhat regional and that kind of stuff? And I don't think any one answer would be dispositive. Like so many questions you and I ask entrepreneurs, we know that they don't have crystal balls. We want to know what they're thinking and how they're thinking. We want to know, or do they know kind of what they don't know, and do they, know what they do know, and are they willing to be receptive to data that may counter their narratives? Because at the end of the day, you and I are looking for women and men who are simply, willing to walk through walls. I mean, you can slow them down, but you can't stop them. And so, there is possibly an industry or a company that would seem dispositive to me for some of the criteria you're suggesting, but it would be incredibly case by case, and it's too early to make any macro conclusions. I don't know what you think. I mean, I have found, because I think macro a lot, but as an investor, I think it actually hurts me, because there's so much that we and entrepreneurs just can't really process, and there's so much complexity. You got to think about the company, you got to think about the entrepreneur, and frankly, you have to think about the portfolio, because you and I are thinking about how a portfolio will be performing, not just any one individual. So I tend to stick pretty closely to that.
My initial view is in relation to if you're starting a business now, think about the counterparty risk more than you would otherwise.
That's interesting.
in the sense that your suppliers, your creditors, will they pay you? Where are they? How risky is it doing business with particular people in this part of the world? We have low oil prices as well.
Yep.
Economic downturn and the recession. So I think in as part of the logistical problem, I look at your counterparty. I look at your counterparty risk when looking at a company now more than before. Now,
it's an extremely good point, Hany, because in the short term, I definitely have companies right now that are worried about getting their bills paid. And so I mean, it's in the short term, it's a no-brainerly important. I think you're absolutely right.
So we have people are submitting all these questions, right? So which I'll get to. I'll go through them, see if we haven't covered any of them. But let's talk about the future of our business. What do you think we should do differently? What do you think we should be looking at right now? What do you think we should be doing differently when we come back? Online, not online, come back in the real world. What do you think we should do differently?
Well, there are two things which I think have been problematic in our industry before this, and I think it's competitive advantage during and after this. One is we're unbelievably forced and compelled to deploy capital in a time frame, right? And so you and I have to make decisions, and at one level it's important because we're here to support the partners who have invested in us and to make sure that their money make returns. And I think sometimes that can make us short-sighted and to have us go after more tactical considerations and not be thinking as much about the longer term, which leads me to the second, in a way more important one, which is there's a lot of lip service about being entrepreneur friendly. And I think the first often trumps the second. And I actually think there's an incredibly competitive advantage in VC funds that get up in the morning, go to bed at night, checking in on what their entrepreneurs need, building the kind of resources around it that are help to service for them, and quite frankly, just not be bad actors. And it's a little bit like I was alluding to before, where I have been seeing some VCs, kind of bristle, and it's all about them. And they're talking to entrepreneurs, and they're like, I'm going to take 30% off the table. And you and I, in the early days of the ecosystem of the Middle East, there were people trying to seize 60, 70% of an entrepreneur's company in term sheet abuse. And those instincts are not completely gone globally by any stretch of the imagination. So I think there's competitive advantage in those of us who are willing to talk to LPs and say, I know that the conventional wisdom has been 5 to 7 years, but some of this stuff where we want you to be with this ride in a longer area, and here's why. I think there's an opportunity to really walk the talk of being on the side of the entrepreneurs, I think, in very powerful ways. I even think there's an opportunity for us to say is 2 and 20 locked down in a fund. That meaning, getting 2% fees to run our businesses and taking 20% of the investment upside can be rethought as well. One of the things that I do in one of the investment vehicles I have is we have a certain amount of capital that we deploy. And now we're working with all sorts of new sorts of capital who don't want to be locked down in a fund. And we've become very flexible of going to family offices and wealthy individuals and saying, you've paid us a little bit of money so that we can get a first check to an entrepreneur, but there's going to be much more opportunities to do more. Can you move very quickly with us to make sure that that happens? Well, that wasn't done that much a few years ago. So I think that there's a real common sense test that we can bring to this period and say, we've known these things are flawed to begin with. Now's an opportunity for us to go after them and fix them, I think, in a powerful way.
Okay. Now, I'm going to start reading some of the questions.
Awesome.
Right. So this is a very specific question. And actually, this question has been asked so many times. You said, people have accepted virtualization of things. How do you have any specific ideas, or you've seen anywhere in the world how people have virtualized, quote unquote, travel, the travel industry, recreational travel, events industries? Have you seen interesting ideas about virtualizing real life meetings and real life experiences?
I think every company that I talk to is asking themselves this question in some form in their existing business. And I think we're very early days of people thinking about specific ideas that can happen to this. I mean, obviously, companies like Zoom we're on the right track. We knew Zoom was going to be used, is not going to be used less, but more over time. It's just that all of a sudden everything went in a month that would have taken maybe a year or 2 years or 5 years for it to come to fruition. And so it's not like I've seen or anyone has pitched me the virtualization idea, but people are really having interesting discussions about, what it kind of may mean. I'll give you an example. So I've got friends in the travel business, and as you can imagine, some of them are hurting, some of them are not going to make it. Others are hunkering down, thinking they will be big winners when they are survivors overall. And one of the things that gets debated is, well, after this, people are going to travel less because people realize that virtualization works. We don't have to go to as many meetings. Well, maybe that is a scenario. Another scenario is that people travel more because with virtualness, you can work from anywhere and really make it work from anywhere. So if you want to be working near your mom because she's not doing well, you can do that now. If you want to be with a beautiful location, you can do that now. And you always could for some time, but it is now, I think, at a level of acceptance that people will be looking to serve this kind of stuff. Now, what's going to be, I still believe that physicality matters. I'm not sure that, I think people who are in the shared workspace are rethinking that model in a very, very specific way right now. And we'll see whether there are other ways to use complementariness in this virtualness to see whether that can survive.
So you reckon that that actually leads to another question there. Do you reckon there's a permanent and we don't go back in terms of remote jobs and freelance, remote first and freelance jobs second? I mean, I
think what I think is never going back is that we're comfortable with virtual. I think what's never going back is we're happy to we have been anyways, but now at scale. I mean, this is important to underscore. All of this was happening anyway. Now it's going to be at scale and at a wider adoption. And so what's not going back is the definition or the aegis I gave you before, which is it making somebody's life better, easier, faster, cheaper, more efficient, more beautiful? It's simply wonderful to connect with people virtually on a more regular basis. It's not better, but it's access and something that makes life more efficient. There's no reason on earth why you need to go sit in on a lecture anymore, because you can do that anytime you want in your own time and that kind of thing overall. There's no reason why you need to sit in a doctor's office for 45 minutes or an hour and a half when all of a sudden you get quick diagnoses done overall. It just makes life better. Why would you ever pay in cash if what we've all learned in ride sharing and everything else is much more efficient to do it with one click of the button? The difference, I think, is these kinds of behaviors are now at scale and have been at scale at a speed and rapidity that I would not have guessed if we were having this conversation in December.
Yep, it's here to stay, and I'm very thoroughly impressed with Zoom's ability to scale 4 times their business in a couple of weeks. I mean, that's something. I mean, there's a question here about someone asked a question, what do you think the biggest problem of the internet is today? And personally, I would have thought it would have been infrastructure a few years ago, but given the massive surge. But do you think there are any critical flaws in online businesses and the internet as we know it in the industry you joined, or is it going to, or is it superseding your expectations?
I think that there are 2 things which are opportunities. One is what we talked about before, which is the challenge I still think is access. There's still just too many people around the world who do not get fair access to this. I think it is a human right now. Like, I think this thing, I think you and I have known this for a long time, but I think it's been clear in this event, to my analogy before about not having access to roads, that this is a thing that has to be, accessible to everyone, and we have to put more concerted effort to that. In terms of the tools and capabilities that are based in our engagement and all, I must say, for those of us who do have access, it's been pretty powerful and pretty exciting.
It is, hasn't it? I mean, it's done pretty well. Now, obviously, a lot of people are asking that question. No one's got a crystal ball, but take yours out and walk us through it. Walk us through the phases. Right? Walk us through what's the world? How many, what's over going to look like? When is it going to be over? When are we going to get back to when is Flat6Labs going to get back to the office? Right? When are you going to visit us in Cairo? When are you going to do these things? Walk us through it.
I'm usually happy to kind of do some of that speculation with all the obvious caveats, but we really are, and this is one of the things that makes this crisis so different from any one that we've lived through before or different, is it is completely impossible to know some of the core variables that will bring that to bear, that are simply just not in our control and not clear now. I think this will take longer than some people hope in terms of that. One could say at one end of the spectrum, it's when everyone has a vaccine, this particular iteration of this particular crisis will be contained, but that's, probably easily 18 months from now to get the vaccine, let alone to get it disseminated. And we just don't know enough information about this, or whether what they called herd immunity, where so many people have it, that at some point it almost trumps what would happen in an actual vaccine. We just don't know. And so this is one of these interesting things, which
Hello?
actually, I think, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you okay.
This is one of these things where entrepreneurs are very well equipped for this, because at one level they're thinking about a big future, but they're actually really, really focused on kind of getting there. And I think all of us have to realize that there's a North Star of behaviors that will come back, that we don't know when that's going to be. We need to build to it now and sort of be open to the data and be able to sort of evolve our understandings of, will people be back 100%? Will they be back 70%? We just don't know right now. So we just have to kind of go with it and help each other.
I'm going to take you up on that. I think you should, your next article, how long, short or long, should be called "The North Star of Behavior," right?
Okay.
So you should tell us, you should articulate what you think the core behavior of humanity or mankind is, so then we can build suppositions across them. Now,
interesting. I'll think about it.
yeah, please do. Now, there's a question here about someone who's, and that's a judgment call, but I'd like to have your thoughts. And it's a very specific question about someone who's got a training facility, right, a physical training facility, and now obviously is migrating to webinar. Now, then the question regards to, does he go full-time digital and never look back at the physical? Does he hedge his bets? What do you think he should do to answer that question?
Well, I'm going to give you two observations on that. Look, a lot of it is sort of a view of who your target audience is going to be. And despite what I've said, that we've hit this kind of leapfrog moment now where people are adopting things much quicker, as I also alluded to, there are a bunch of people who are not a part of this yet or as comfortable with it, even with what's going on. And so if your customer base are folks that need that physical connectivity and there's a better way of delivery there or necessity there, and that's where your TAM is, well, then that can be a very interesting model. But I think, again, under the auspices of what makes life better, easier, cheaper, more efficient, more beautiful than it was before, lots of this will become and be accepted as something that can be done in digital format. And this is my second observation, because I think we're only beginning to appreciate people's willingness to not only accept that, but to pay for it. There used to be a conventional wisdom of somehow or other, if you did a virtual training or a virtual course, you should pay less for it, or somehow it was less. I think that question is going to go on. It may be less because competitively you can charge less because it's cheaper and you want to share a margin with someone, or you have a competitor who's compelling you to do it. But I'll give you an example. I've been affiliated with a very well-known university here who had a very visionary dean who really blew out with a company called 2U, master's programs of course taking virtually, under the theory that there are people around the world who'd love to come to a Washington, D.C. university and get their master's degree. And there were two things that completely shocked them when they rolled this out quite successfully. One is that people came from around the world, but an unbelievable amount of outstanding candidates came from within 5 or 7 miles of the campus headquarters, because they knew they needed to live at home with their children, or they knew they couldn't do rush hour travel at 7 o'clock at night in Washington, D.C. And so they just wanted the virtualness because it just fit with their life and their timing. And secondly, which surprised everyone was willing to pay the same amount. They're paying, literally virtual students are paying the same for a master's degree at this university as physical students, because that's the value that they see in the proposition. Employers and people at the other end of this, I think, are going to be more accepting of temporary and short courses as ways of building up skills, because I think we're going to have a huge debate about whether 4-year universities are even the future at all. But education will be. It'll just manifest itself in different ways, and the virtualness of it will actually, I think, take it there much faster.
There's a question about how do you reckon this virtualization and of jobs, or I mean working from home or similar, will permanently increase the supply of talent?
It's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out, because there'll be positive scenarios and obviously not so positive scenarios. And we're seeing right now, for all the power of the gig economy that have allowed people to work in ways that they have never been able to work before, with a level of flexibility that they've never worked before. I mean, I've met, and I interview, as you pointed out earlier, I've interviewed every ride sharing driver that I've ever driven with. I've probably been thousands of them by now around the world. And all of them, you know, will talk about the power of the flexibility in their lives, and that trade-off has been good for them. Now, needless to say, they're suffering terribly right now. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out overarchingly. But it is going to also open up opportunities for people who, again, want flexibility in their lives, and they will be delivering services that can be done virtually. And so it has been amazing to me to see what, you know, Pilates teachers and yoga instructors and counseling. I mean, think about this right now. I mean, and this is a whole sector of places for people, I think, to look at, you know, in areas of things like mental health, which always lent itself quite well to virtualness because of its anonymity and the safety of being at home. Well, now it's like such a powerful, powerful thing in a period of stress. And so we're going to see, I think, real opportunities that will come with this also.
So can you please repeat the name of the university that you mentioned?
I didn't name the university.
Oh, you didn't name the university? Okay, sorry.
You could find it.
Okay,
I don't want to speak on their behalf, but it's a very well known. It's a very well known.
There's one question now. Actually, this question will keep till the end now.
Actually, you know something. I mean, some of the kids here will want to take a master's program there, so I'm actually doing them a favor. It's American University. It was a School of International Service.
Okay.
And they've just been they've done amazing stuff with that.
Now, just on the lighter side, to keep people on their toes, think of us as highly trained sports people in the off season. Good habits, good books, good sources of information, you know, that Chris Schroeder goes to. And that covers a few of the questions here.
Well, there are two things that have been part of my life that I've been, I think, expanding on it. And one is that I've always read a lot of books a year. I read pretty quickly. But about a year ago, I had two conversations that kind of changed my life. And one of them was with a guy, a great entrepreneur from Silicon Valley who committed to and read 100 books in a year. Okay. And I called him up and literally talked to him. How did you do it? And really, it's just about discipline and about trade-offs. And you just say to yourself, I'll be on social media, or I'm going to read a book. Or if I'm going to watch a video on Netflix, I won't do it until I've read 100 pages. And it's amazing incrementally, you know, how you can embed that. And I feel smarter and different experience for it. The second feedback came from a dear friend of mine who actually served in combat, and life. He has a very deep sensitivity for time and life, as we all do, but as you can imagine, is brought to the fore in that experience. And he said to me once, he said, you know, how many years do you think you will live? And how many books do you read a year? And do the math. Okay. Now, I have no idea how long I will live, but if I go by actuarial tables and I look at the number of books I've read previous per year, that is a scarily short number of books. And it has just given me a discipline, one, to want to read more, and secondly, to really compel myself to say, is this a book I should be reading or not? And I'll do something. I used to always read books till the end. If by page 50 I'm done with it, I probably will give up and move to something else. And it goes to a broader question that you're asking, which is, what's true of books is true of life. You know, are you spending time with people who are taking energy or not? Is it helping your business move forward or not? Are you giving enough time to your family or not? Because it is a zero sum. And so that's what I've taken, you know, to anything that I do, whether I'm watching Netflix or whether I'm going for a hike, whether I'm reading books.
So, okay, but you have to be more specific. In this day and age, there are sources of information that of varying qualities. What can people, if you give us, or think about it, you don't have, I don't want to put you in the spot. What sources of information do you reckon entrepreneurs should read to better understand the crisis and the ensuing life after that. If you know any of them, you can share them. You know, they can
Yeah, I've read a couple of books, and I can text you the names of them that were about earlier pandemics, like the one in 1918. There's a classical one that came out in 2004. I've just lost the title, but I have to tell you, I wouldn't advise that. Like, I don't, you know, you can read an article about that or go to Wikipedia. I'm not sure how that helpful is to you. I think finding those kind of books that help you think differently about navigating your life and your business are very, very powerful. So you mentioned before, and I can't agree with you enough. I wish I had both of Ben Horowitz's books, you know, when I was building my last companies overall, because the hard thing about hard things is completely instructive, not only in these times, but even in the day-to-day crises that all our businesses do. And the book about culture, which goes back to a lot of what you've talked about today, which is, you know, what you do is who you are. You know, your actions and decisions, in fact, are a reflection of who you are and the culture you're building around you. I think we're invaluable books by any stretch of the imagination. There are amazing videos and podcasts that are instructive. If your folks have not spent time on Andreessen Horowitz's site, A16Z has amazing, interesting, instructive, and often global perspective things about what we're dealing with in this virus, we're doing here. And then the third advice that I would get is follow people whose judgment you respect. And what I mean by that is what they read is as instructive as what you should read as almost anything else. And sometimes we get caught in the mass of social media, and we also get reactive to it. We have to be disciplined. You know, there's a lot of talk about how technology and algorithms have ruined news, and there are many things that these companies have to explain about for themselves, and many changes have to be made. I don't walk away from that entirely, but mostly I think we're to blame. We as individuals. If we're getting tricked by fake news, or if we're going down a rabbit hole about something and running of our business, it's because we haven't had the discipline to find an alternative source, or to very much just ask the question, like, is that really true? And if we just literally sit back and think what is fed to us is everything that we need to make decisions in life or our businesses, it's a mistake. And so my greatest beneficiary in what I read comes from a really small number of people that I follow on social media that I know that if they've read it and it's good, it should be on my list.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes left, but I'm gonna put you on the spot that if you can possibly, we share with us the people you follow on social media. We'll do it discreetly, right? And also those 2 books about previous pandemics, that will be great. We can distribute them to the people who are who participating. Now we have 5 minutes. Now a lot of the people a lot of the entrepreneurs are asking one or maybe 2 questions. What can I do to make myself, you know, right now there's not much business happening, right? Keeping the things afloat. What can I do to become a better entrepreneur? And they actually phrase it in the form of better entrepreneur, not a better person, a better entrepreneur. And I'm sure you understand the distinction of their thinking, even though I think it's wrong to think like that. But what can I do to be a better entrepreneur? And the other thing is, how do I stay relevant in this world? You know, how can I be out there, right? You know, if you're an entrepreneur and you're a hustler, you do it physically. How do you hustle virtually? So how do I improve and how do I hustle virtually are 2 of the biggest thoughts that people keep asking us.
There is very few blessings in the period that we're in right now, associated with its terribleness that we all know. But a mild blessing to it is we've all been given 2 things. We've been given an opportunity to reflect and to breathe a little bit about what goes on around us. And we have an opportunity to connect with people who are completely empathetic for this circumstance because we're all in it together. And one of the things as entrepreneurs that I could never do, and as a venture capitalist I can't do enough, is to read and to think and to step back and to work with my team and ask myself some very basic questions like what did we believe now that we think might be different? Or what do we believe now that we believe will be true for all times? Or what are 3 things that we know previously we should have done differently? We just didn't have the time to do it. And this is all an ability to sort of get a reset in place by asking some foundational and fundamental questions that can do it. And you can bring the hustle into that, because some of that is done internally as you read and whatever. Some of it is done when you talk to your team, and the team should have regular conversations, checking some of these premises and sort of asking that very question. But the third and the hustle part is, and this goes to the empathy point, is you can now reach out to people in very powerful ways and check in with them. What do they think? What are they hearing? Here's something on my mind that is specific. Everyone that I'm talking to right now has mentors that they talk to at general times and general moments. Well, this is a defining moment, and it's an incredible opportunity to talk to people. There's an unbelievable opportunity to talk to your customers. How are you, first and foremost? What are you doing? Do you need anything? Is there anything I could do? I'm there for you. I want you to know that. And it's not just lip service, it's a real thing. And then what are you learning? What do you think is going to be different about your business? Because when we come out of this, I want to be ready for your need. I mean, how more hustle can you be by that? And it also happens to be the right thing to do.
Yes. Well, on that particular note, we'll leave it at that. On behalf of all our attendees and everyone, I'd like to thank you, Chris, for joining. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. I wish you continued safety, happiness for yourself and everyone around you. And thank you for doing this.
And to you and to everyone. And I will just say before Sarah takes us out, I've just seen on my screen that you have Alex Lazaro speaking at your next one. He is terrific and just wrote a fantastic must-read book about kind of what's happening globally, which I think is going to become more relevant and not less so in light of what we're doing. So I'm glad to see him up there as well.
All right, brilliant. Thank you very much for everyone attending. Thank you, the audience, and thank you, Chris. And
thank you all.
Signing off from Cairo to DC.
Signing off from DC. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week at the same time, 4 p.m. Cairo time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.